This brought to you by Warner Brothers Studios. Is anybody else feeling like, I don't really want to listen to the guy up there. I want to see more of that. Like, I saw the title package. I was like, we can't play that before the sermon. Like, I got to follow that. Like, it's epic, but it's an epic story. Today, we're starting a brand new series called Under the Clear Blue Sky. And this series is about the story of Noah and the flood. And I'll just say this. We got people joining us from all over the place, all of our different campuses, different locations across the country, around the world. Some of you are traveling on vacation. Thrilled you could join us. Before you tune me out, some of you this story's problematic for you. If you're new to the Bible, or if you're somebody who's skeptical of the Bible, I'm aware that there's all sorts of potholes when it comes to this story. In fact, that's why a lot of people avoid stories like this story and the story of Jonah and others like it in the Old Testament. And there's a couple of reasons, and I want to just step in a couple of the potholes to start and just ask you to give me a little bit of latitude as we look at this what is, I believe, a brilliant literary work of art from literally about 3,000 years ago. The first pothole is this. Some of you are wondering of the historical accuracy of the story. And you have good reasons for that. There's no archaeological evidence that's been discovered of a worldwide flood. There's evidence that people or animals existed before and after the flood. And I'm aware of those things. Some of you are thinking, what about the dinosaurs? Like, there's all sorts of things related to this story that are problematic for you. And I'm gonna try to address some of those things in this story, but I'm not gonna be able to address all of them. But here's what I want you to know. This historical idea was not the author's intent. We'll talk more about that. The second one is this. Some of you have a problem with the Old Testament God. In fact, you're secretly hoping, like, can we just get back to the New Testament? Like, I love Jesus and I love his teachings, and I don't know how to reconcile the Jesus of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament. I'm so glad you have that feeling, but I think it's because somebody misrepresented Yahweh, the story of the God of the Old Testament. And I'm gonna try to address both of these things, honestly, but neither one of them are my primary concern. We're gonna try to address some things related to these things. So if you'll stick around and join us for these 3 weeks, I'm gonna get to these things. But the reason neither of these are my primary concern is because I want us to be asking, not the question, did it happen? We can argue that, we can debate that. As a matter of fact, you can email me if you'd like some resources related to did it happen, the historical accuracy, or even reconciling the God of the Old Testament and Jesus of the New Testament. I would love to have that dialogue with you. In fact, you can email me, I'll send you some resources. I would love to debate that with you. However, it's not the point of this series. What I wanna ask is not did it happen, but what does it mean? What does the story mean? This is a really old story that's been preserved for us, and it's not the only place the flood story was preserved. I've studied this narrative exhaustively, like over 100 hours, and I not only believe it happened, I believe it happens, and I believe it is happening now in our world, in our society. Many of us, most of us, have faced, are facing, or will face seasons or circumstances or situations where something in our lives is quietly heading in the wrong direction. A relationship, a habit, your leadership, our finances. Maybe it's something in your personal life. Maybe it's your integrity, and it's been drifting or it's heading in the wrong direction. And you don't realize it, but there's catastrophe on the horizon. And here's what I wanna do over the next few weeks. We're gonna unpack this ancient story that gives us a framework, and we're gonna unpack it maybe in a way some of you have never heard it. And you're willing to I'm willing for you to fact check me or check all the historical accuracy of what we're gonna talk about. But I wanna unpack this ancient story because it gives us a framework for how catastrophe happens and how we can avoid it. And it's brilliant. If you have a Bible and you wanna follow along, Genesis chapter 6 is where the story is found. It's the 6th chapter of the very first book in the Bible. And so one of the things we need to recognize up front is we're isolating one story in a much bigger ancient narrative. So we're gonna have to reference other parts of that narrative, especially the stuff that's come before. And at the very beginning, we get a hint of something that came before this in the very first verse of Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, I'm excited. And the story starts this way. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. Now, I know we're only one verse in, but this is language that's echoing the creation story. And the creation story, I want to give us a little bit of context. The creation story is meant to portray something specific. Oops, I'm making a mess up here. The creation story tells a story of something that's happening in the world. And it's meant, the author of Genesis is meaning not for us to give a historically accurate picture of what happened, but what he's saying is, who's the God behind this? And where did we come from? And what does it tell us about who we are? And what we learn in the beginning is that the God of the universe, the creator God, he was a God of order. And what he did was, in the very beginning, is he separated, if you go back to the Genesis account, he separates the land and the waters. That the waters were hovering. Some of you remember this. We've sung this story. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God created order. He created land. What he actually does in the beginning is he separates the water and the land. And this is the creation story. The creation story in the beginning is that God is creating order. And what he does is he separates the water from the land. All right, that was a lot. And here's what he does. In separating the water from the land, he is actually creating order from chaos. So it's moving from chaos into order. He's creating order. That's what God's doing in the creation story. He's making order out of the chaotic waters. That's what the waters in the Genesis story, in Genesis 1, represent this chaos. And here's what happens. God creates this world he through separation and through expansion. The first 3 chapters of Genesis are about separation. He separates the land and the water and the light and the darkness. And he continues to separate. He sets the sun and the moon and the stars to rule over the things that he separated. And then through expansion, he creates the birds and the creatures and the animals and man. And then he sets man as a ruler over the things that he's expanded. And so this is a very orderly account of what God does. And some of you remember this. And then God steps back and God saw all that he created. And when he saw all that he created, what did he say? He saw it and he said it was good. That this was good. And it's actually the word tov in the Old Testament Hebrew language. He said he saw it and he saw that it was good and he saw it was good, and what he did was he actually gave what he created. He gave it to the man and the woman that he created to rule over. He gave them this land to rule over. And he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to name the animals and I want you to rule over. You have dominion and I'm giving you access to everything except one thing. There's one tree in the middle of the garden. It's the tree of good, tov, and evil, which is the word ra. It's the tree of the knowledge of tov and ra. And I don't want you to eat that or you'll surely die. And he just says that's the only rule, but everything else he gave them access to for their enjoyment. And then what does he say? He says, be fruitful and multiply. Sorry, this is a little bit messy, but here's the idea. He said, be fruitful and multiply. And when he said, be fruitful and multiply, he be fruitful and multiply with what I gave you. And what he's asking them to be fruitful and multiply is the good that he's created in the world. This is the backdrop of the very first verse of Genesis chapter 1. So it seems like they're doing exactly what God wanted them to do. In God's creation, he created order from chaos, and he saw it was good. He said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to make more of that. More humans, more of your ruling, more of your activity equals more good in the world. Except that's not what happened, and several stories before this show us it's not what happened, and it continues in chapter 6. In fact, it gets worse. The sons of God who were fallen angels, they saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any that they chose. Now, notice the parallel in contrast. They saw something. And if you were to read this in Hebrew, this word attractive, it's actually the word tov. They saw the daughters of man who were tov. They were attractive, and they took them as their wives, anyone that they chose. Now, these fallen angels, that what they saw, they thought was good. They thought it was tov to them. So they took these women to be their own wives, which was unnatural. It was against God's created order. And it's now not just something that's happening on the earth. This is cosmic disorder. This is happening on earth and in heavens, and things are falling apart. And even if you're new to the Bible, this language might sound familiar to you because it's actually a copy and paste of an earlier story. Anyone? It's the Genesis 3 story. In the Genesis 3 story, we see a similar pattern, but what we see is that chaos in this situation, in Genesis 3, chaos comes out of order. God created the world for order, but what happened was man decided not to follow God's order, not to follow God's rule, not to do what God said. And we find out, and it's the same story in Genesis 3, Eve saw something. And she saw something not that was good, she saw something, and this is the language, that seemed good. It seemed good to her, same word. It seemed attractive to her. And so what Eve does is Eve she took what she saw, and she did more of it. And the next story, in fact, this is the fourth story in Genesis that follows this same pattern. It started with Eve. And then Cain does the same thing. He saw what was good to him and did what was right in his eyes. And then Lamech, and each time it intensifies. And we find out in this story that reflects this same pattern, this chaos that's going into order because man decided to do what was right in their own eyes, someone who was not God. And we find out that the Lord said, my spirit, it shall not abide in man forever, for his flesh is only to be 120 years. Now, there's a lot of debate about what this 120 years, but this is also part of the same pattern. In all four of those stories, there's a consequence that has to do with man's decisions, and it involves abbreviated life. It was in the garden, you will surely die, to which the serpent said, no, you're not gonna die. And then death enters the world. In the Cain story, Abel dies and others beyond him. There's mass killing in Lamech's story. And this is what's happening. And now God says, this is even more pervasive. And it's not just that everyone's years are gonna be limited, but life itself is gonna be abbreviated. And then, this is so interesting if you study the story, the author inserts something. He inserts a piece of evidence that means nothing to you or to me, but to his original audience, it would have been evidence proving that what seemed good to Eve and what seemed good to the sons, these fallen angels, these sons of God, was in fact not good at all. And this is what he says. He says, the Nephilim, which some of you have never even heard of, were on the earth in those days. The Nephilim were the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man. The offspring were the Nephilim. These were these giants. We find them later in the biblical story. This is where Goliath's family comes from the Nephilim. They were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and they bore children to them. Basically, he's saying these mighty men of old, they were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. You've heard of them. You know all about them. Basically, is what he's saying. We all know these people. And here's what he's saying is, you know the chaos that they were creating for our people, for humanity. From then until now. It's interesting. The author's, he's acknowledging that this is where this all started. We all know where these Nephilim came from, these mighty men of renown that create chaos. And he's not hiding the fact that they were there before and after the flood, which is part of some people's concern. Well, there were things, I thought everything was destroyed in the flood. This author uses hyperbole throughout. And now that I've told you that, you'll see it all over the place. He uses hyperbole in the same ways that we do. Everybody's going to the game. Everybody's doing this. Everybody's doing that. All the people were involved in this. It's like he's using this same language. And he's not denying that there were things or people that existed before and after the flood. So if that's your hang up, just pause on that for a second. It then goes on to say that the Lord saw something. He saw the wickedness of man, that it was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, is that true? I mean, is it every intention of their thoughts were only evil continually? This is hyperbole. This is what the author's using. This is how he's telling the story. It's for effect. In some ways, he's helping us understand that this is a significant problem and it's pervasive and no one's immune to it. All of humanity is dealing with this. And here's what's interesting. This is in contrast to the Genesis 1 story, because God sees something and what he sees is not good, even though it seemed good to man. The word that's used over here, only evil continually. What seemed good to man and what seemed good to the fallen angels was not good. It was raw. And it was raw continually. And it was raw over and over. And it was in a way that God didn't design the world to be. See, this whole story in Genesis, all through up to the beginning of chapter 6. Some of you are thinking, I thought this was about a boat and a flood. We're gonna get to that part. But we missed these parts in the beginning that are so significant. I mean, these other stories just happened a few pages earlier in this story. I mean, a long time before chronologically, but for the audience who is reading this for the first time, it's just a few pages ago. The story is about humans ruling the world as image bearers of God, carrying his goodness and his image to the world to experience and multiply, to be fruitful and multiply what is good in the world and in the earth. And God repeatedly points them toward his goodness. He repeatedly points them in the right direction. And humanity continually disregards God's order and what he says is good, his instructions and his warnings. And they choose what seems good to them. And what happens is humanity, in fact, we are told in the very first verse that they are fruitful and they multiply. The problem is they're not fruitful in multiplying the things that God intended for them to. They took what they saw was right in their own eyes, and what they've done is they've continually multiplied raw, what is not good, what God did not intend. And the narrative tells us that the Lord regretted this. He regretted that he had made man on the earth. Now, this is ironic because I think this translation of this word regretted is actually one of the most regrettable translations in this story. And here's why, is because the word, you can look this up, the literal Hebrew word means to comfort or to console oneself. It's actually, we don't really have a word for it in English, but it's sort of despair and comfort together. And so what the narrative's actually saying is God's comforting himself in his disappointment. And here's how we know, is because he regretted that he had made the man on the earth and it grieved him to his heart. God's consoling himself. God is in despair. It's interesting, there's 4 other flood narratives. Maybe the only one, if you're into literature, you may have heard of is the Epic of Gilgamesh. But you can look these up. There's 4 other flood narratives that are all from around the same period. Like, about around 3000 BC. You can find these narratives, and they're all remarkably similar in how they describe the flood narrative. There's a lot of similarities, but the others portray God, or the gods as they talk about them in these narratives, as vengeful or indifferent to the people. And it's very easy to read this into the flood story. And I don't know about you, but it's what I was taught on the flannelgraph, that this is what this made God angry, and he was angry at the evil in the world, and he decided he was gonna destroy it. But that's not how this author is portraying God. His beloved creation, that was formerly Tov, all of it. He said it 7 times in the Genesis 1 narrative. He saw all the things and he names them and they're all good. It's now pervasively compromised. There's a cosmic problem. And God's not angry, he's grieved. God's saddened by this. He's grieving because he's seeing the exact opposite of what he intended for his creation. They were created for goodness. They were created for Tov. But now what they're multiplying is Ra. So, this is the gotcha moment. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land. Man and animals and creepy things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. Then this is where people go, oh, see, this is it. You're gonna have to explain this part. God says, I will blot them out. But I learned from several people, one particular really well-respected Old Testament scholar. He's a Hebrew scholar. His name's John Sailhamer. And John Sailhamer says that that's a very rudimentary or a very elementary reading of the story. Because if you look at the story, what he's describing is actually creation in reverse. If you were to go back and look at the creation story, God created the birds first, and then he created the creepy things or the creatures that crawl along the ground, and then he creates the animals, and then he creates man. And what he's actually describing here is that order is going back into chaos. And it's a sort of, we don't really have the right word, it's destruction, but it's even more than destruction, it's decreation. It's this creation that God created in the beginning is now decreating. It's going backwards. And what he meant to be orderly and what he meant the structure for us to live when he separated the waters and he created the land and he created the structures of the world and all that was good, it's reverting back into chaos. And actually what's happening is the floodwaters are coming back in. They're collapsing back in on mankind, and it's bringing the chaos back in on top of the order of the world. This is what's actually being described in the literary language, in this very poetic language of this storytelling. And if, as a matter of fact, if we peek ahead, we're not gonna go all the way there yet, but if you go to chapter 7 and we look at the day in which the flood started, the rains flooded, look how this happens. It says, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, the waters coming up, and the floodgates of the sky were opened up and they came down. And basically what the author is saying is because of human choice, the floodwaters are coming up out of the ground and the chaotic waters are coming out of the sky, and it's collapsing back in on God's created order. And it's because of man's choice that this is happening. And just so you know, I'm not denying God's agency in this, in the consequences. This is a divine judgment. But one of the things that I learned from Dr. Sailhamer is that he frames this judgment differently. I want you to think about it this way for a minute. This is not God sitting around manufacturing a consequence for people to hand out to humanity, but rather it's a giving people over to the fruit of their choices. That's what God's doing, because that's what God does. God's a giver. He gave, and this is actually exactly, if you're more in tune with the New Testament, the truth is this is exactly how the Apostle Paul describes this in the New Testament. He says that God made evil, good and evil, plain in the sight of man. This is how he describes it in Romans chapter 1. And man exchanged God's wisdom for his own foolishness. And what does he say? God gave them over to their sinful desires. See, this is what's happening in this story. This is a story of a brokenhearted father watching his kids make choices he knows have real consequences in life. And in his divine wisdom, he comes to the conclusion of what's best. And this is a judgment. He's making a judgment call about what's best, and in his divine wisdom, the conclusion he comes to is to choose to give to them what they desire. He gives them over to what they desire. And what seemed to them was good was not good. It was actually evil. It was raw. It was not good. Now, if you're thinking, I'm not so sure about this story and is it true? If you listen to all that and you don't think that's true, you're just not being honest. That's what happened in the story, but that's what happens in life, is it not? And that's what's happening now in our world if we're willing to be honest and we're willing to think about it. We see things that we think think seem good to us. And so we take them. We take hold of them. And there's often things, they're not things God has given to us. There are things that in fact God has warned us against. And we take them. We take hold of them. And it leads to things that are not good. That's what's happening in the world. This is moral relativism. I'm gonna step on toes, so if you don't like that, pull your feet back in real quick. I'm gonna step on some toes. This is tolerance and acceptance in our world. We need to be more tolerant and more accepting because that seems dignifying. And so you can have your truth and I can have my truth, which is actually denigrating. It's actually pacifying. There is no your truth and there is no my truth. There's only the truth. And we can either look at the truth and discover what the truth is, or we can close our eyes to it. But there is no my truth and your truth. There's just true reality. This has happened, the sexual revolution. And again, I don't want to get sideways on this, but you need to understand this. We wanted freedom. And we wanted people to be empowered, and so we wanted to be liberated from the confines of fidelity and monogamy and purity and things like that. Those are old traditional constructs of the world, like inside of marriage, like that. That's crazy, but the results have been devastating. In fact, people are getting married less, divorced more, and it's pretty much bad for everybody. It's been objectifying for women, disorienting for young people, addicting because of how pervasive our sexualized culture is. This is what is happening. It's the digital age. We want progress. And again, I'm all for digital. I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, I have a Mac, I'm into technology. But in the name of progress, we want increased connection and access online, but we get access to all sorts of things we shouldn't have access to. And it isolates us. And it can be addicting for us. It creates anxiety. So here's the first question before we get to the boat and before we get to the flood. Here's the first question I think this narrative is asking you and it's asking me is who gets to define what is good? Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what is good? I mean, come on, really. Let's be honest for a minute and be honest with yourself. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to say it out loud, but who's the ultimate authority when it comes to what is good? When it comes to what is good for you, for what is good for your marriage and for your kids and for your family and for your eyes and for your business, for your finances. Who gets to define what is good for you? Not what's the right answer. That's not what I'm after. What I'm asking is, who possesses decision rights about what is good in your life? See, we're really good at justifying what we think is good or right for us, even when we know it disregards God's instructions, when it disregards his order, his design, his created order for us in the world, the structure he's created to guard us and to guide us. When we do that, what we're doing is we're claiming authority to define what is good or bad according to our own wisdom. It's like not disclosing the hidden risk involved for your clients in purchasing your product or doing the deal, but it was good for the deal and it got the deal done. So it's sort of the ends justified the means. It's misrepresenting your contribution on a project that many other people were involved in and you didn't really have a big part in because it was good for your career and it got you the promotion. It's that extra drink when you got home from work because it was a stressful day and it could really take the edge off and it seemed good. It even seemed necessary. How could that be bad? It's the extra attention and the vulnerability from your opposite sex coworker that you would never tell your wife about or you would keep hidden from your husband because it felt good. And you wanted that relationship to continue because of how it felt for you. See, before the story's about a boat or a flood, the story's about decision rights. And when it comes to what is good, you will either decide on your own or you will discern what God has laid out as good. So here's the question I want you to wrestle with. Where in your life have you held on to your right to choose? Your right to decide what's good for you versus trying to discern what God defines as good and right for you. Good and right for our world, good and right for humanity. See, this story is warning us that God will let us decide. He will allow us to give ourselves over to our desires. But there's catastrophe coming on the other side of it. Now, I got outvoted, but I wanted to name the series The Flood is Coming. The team was like, no, that's too apocalyptic. We're gonna scare people. That's gonna sound weird. But it is. The flood is coming. The truth is we all make decisions and we make choices, and when they're contrary to God's instructions and his goodness and his wisdom, there's consequences and oftentimes catastrophe on the other side of that. We see this in all sorts of places in our culture. Years ago, when we were trying to decide what to do about our kids and phones, like this is a hard thing. It's like, what do you do? And how early do you give your kid a phone and what access? I mean, do you just give them like a flip phone or do you give them access? I mean, there's all sorts of danger in this device that they be carrying around. Most of us don't know how to handle it, much less give that to one of our kids. And I share a lot more about this in our Parent Summit. Parent Summit Online, it's just a digital resource that's free, that was just released. And I'll just say, I just gotta make this disclaimer. My wife and I certainly have not gotten everything right as parents. But on this one, we sought some wise counsel and we did our research and we prayed. And I'll just tell you, this is what we sensed. We sensed that what seemed good, and I wrote seemed God here and I realized that, but what seemed good, just fix that because it's actually kind of the same thing. It seemed like God, but what seemed good was not good at all. And the direction things were going just weren't going well. So here's what we decided. We decided for our kids that there would be no social media. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know that sounds extreme, but there would be no social media. I got a clap out of that. That's amazing. We decided there would be no social media. And here's the thing, we knew it would be a battle. And we didn't know how it would go for them, especially with their friends. And this was hard. Like, we made this decision before we decided to move from Arizona back to Georgia. And when we moved, our kids were going into their teenage years. And I heard over and over, we heard, everyone has social media. Everyone has it. It's how they keep up with each other. It's how they know what's going on. But I'm gonna tell you something. In fact, I'm gonna read you something that my wife and I carry around as a treasure trophy. And it's an essay that was written by my daughter who just graduated from high school. It was her college essay, and the prompt was, what's something that you're grateful for that you haven't always been grateful for? And she sent it to me. I'm gonna do my best to get through it, but she sent it to me. She asked me to edit it before she sent it off to the colleges that she was applying to. And I just cried. And I responded and I said, it's perfect. But everyone else is doing it. That was always my opening line, my attempt at negotiating with her. Her response was always the same, but you're not everyone else. Frustrating. It was so frustrating because I knew she was right. When I would ask, why do you have to be this way? My mom would respond, you can hate me if you have to, but I'm just looking out for you. It's not that deep, I'd say. You're overthinking this. Ironic coming from her 13-year-old daughter. But every time she had some kind of way to flip the script, causing me to wonder that maybe, just maybe, because she was 30 years older than me, she may know a little more than me. I can't even remember the first time the rule was spoken, only that it existed. My parents had decided when we were little that there would be no social media for my brothers and I, at least not yet. They never really told us when we could get it, but I could just hear them saying, when you move out of our house, you can do whatever. But when you live under our roof, you will follow our rules. The timeline was vague. So I sat there, 13 years old, my mind buzzing, believing I was missing out on everything. But part of me deep down wondered if maybe in her annoying, frustrating way, my mom was right. As the years went on, I would watch some of my closest friends struggle with comparison. They were drawn into drama and they struggled with their own view of themselves. And while I had some of those same struggles, as most high school girls do, I truly believe that I somehow escaped a whole lot of hurt and pain because of my distance from social media. And for that, I will be forever grateful. I'm grateful that 13-year-old me didn't have to wonder if she looked good enough in a photo because that photo wasn't going anywhere anyway. I'm so grateful that 15-year-old me wasn't scrolling through looking at pictures of pictures that people were posting and wondering why she wasn't invited. I'm grateful that I wasn't known by the things I posted or the people I followed. People's perceptions of me were based off real interactions with me. While I was frustrated and I disagreed for so many years, I now see that it's true. I'm not everyone else. And I don't want to be, because I wasn't created to be. My mom wasn't just telling me no. She wasn't trying to single me out or make my life harder. Deep down, she was reminding me that my value is not defined by everyone else, that I didn't have to chase what everyone else was chasing in order to matter in this world. As I look back, I see that those words have much bigger meaning and have affected me more than I could have imagined. God created us to be set apart, not because we're better than anyone else, but because we're loved enough to be different. At 13, being different most definitely sounded like a punishment, but it really was protection. I'm grateful she refused to let me blend in when blending in could have cost me who I was becoming. Now listen, don't miss that part. This isn't all about social media. Here's the problem with being an adult. We think we know better. And worse, we get to decide if we want to, what we think is good for us, and we often do. It's the oldest problem. It's the oldest temptation, is to try to decide for ourselves, to not structure an authority over us, but to decide for ourselves, because we're adults now, what's good for us. This story is a reminder that that doesn't end well. Some of the most dangerous circumstances in life don't feel dangerous at all. They feel normal. Like life under a clear blue sky. The storms are nowhere on the horizon yet. But think about it. Marriages don't collapse overnight. They drift until they're so far apart that it's not abnormal to just leave, to abandon, or to seek feeling good in somebody else's arms. Addiction doesn't begin as sickness. It starts as relief or escape, but it leads to imprisonment. Financial ruin. It doesn't start with a noose around our neck. We charge it because we can, or we borrow it because they'll let us. And then you lose a job. And then you face bankruptcy. And then you have bad credit or no credit. And you're struggling to catch up. And God's created structures for all of that. It's in his word. He's trying to guide us towards what is good. So one last time before we finish, who gets to define what is good for you? You owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself and to get clear on this. You will either decide and define for yourself what is good, or you'll get serious about the work of discerning, because not everything's black and white. Discerning what is good for you, what the good is that God wants to lead you toward in your life, what he defines as good. But make no mistake, if you decide to chase after what seems good to you, God's consistent, and he will give you over to the desires and the consequences that accompany the desires of your heart. Now, there is hope coming, so don't miss next week. There's a good part of the story. There's this guy named Noah. And by the way, if you think God's not needing comfort, Noah's name actually means to comfort or console. You can't make this up. It's brilliant literature. And I hope you'll join us next week, but don't miss the opportunity to evaluate through this question. Who has decision rights? Is it you? Or are you surrendering those to a heavenly Father who in his wisdom wants to guide you to goodness and life? Let me pray for you. God, I pray today for somebody who's here and they're wrestling and they're in the midst of this right now. They're drifting, they're walking away, they've disregarded your wisdom. I pray that they would get clear, that they would invite wisdom, they would step into community, they would move towards people that would help them to discern what the way forward is. Nobody's ever too far gone. It's never too late. This is what you do. You create beauty out of ashes. That's what you've told us. You can redeem all things. And so we just trust this conversation and this series and these moments to you. We'd ask that you'd guide us. Pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.